Hi, I've been learning React, and I've been following along with this book, Learning React, a hands-on guide, second edition by this guy. I have no affiliation with him, but what I've been doing is going through the examples and then trying to do them on my own after. And so this will be an attempt to do one on my own, and we'll see how it goes. I'll talk through it. Maybe I'll put that in a comment. Good book. It's actually got very high reviews and it's been going well. So one of the examples that he does is, I think it could have been yesterday. I'm going to try to see if I can recreate it on my own here using React. I've been using this codesandbox.io to run React, and it uses Babel and it converts the React stuff in the JSX into regular JavaScript in real time for you. Well, not necessarily real time, but it will show up over on this side. And you'll see what I'm talking about, but it's really easy and you don't have to set up a work environment. The IDE is actually great, and it's all just free, and just go to codesandbox.io and bring up a React project. If you don't know anything about React, it's a JavaScript library, and this is actually the page that's showing. And so like if I go stick a little div in here, whoops, let's say just hi, you'll see it shows up right there. So this is the actual page that's showing on the right side here, and what we're doing with JavaScript and what you'll see when we start working in this index.js file is we're finding this div that's already here by its ID root. And so right here where the cursor is, like in this area right here, is where we're inserting everything we're doing here. And you'll see what I mean by that. So this is just like a boilerplate HTML page with this ID in the body tags where we're going to dump everything we're doing in this JavaScript file. So we won't even need to touch this file. So I'm going to try to create this thing from scratch, but the example comes from the book above there. So I'm going to need three classes. Well, first I need to import React. So you import React with a capital R from React. And this stuff is all in these dependencies here. And this little codesandbox.io has already loaded these dependencies for you. And that's why I like it. I don't have to mess around with my own environment. But you probably do something pretty much the same no matter what environment you're in. And then I'm going to import the React DOM, which allows it to display out to a regular browser. And this second part, the React DOM, could be like React Mobile or whatever, and you could actually output your React to different outputs. Right now I'm going to output it to a regular like browser type DOM, so I'll import React DOM. I will have three classes here. So one class is going to be the main card. So I'll say class, and this is like a piece of paper, like a card that would have like a paint sample on it. So I'll just call it card. It extends React with a capital R, component with a capital C. This is technically a React component right here. And so React components are reusable pieces of code. A lot of different ways to do this, but the component can contain not only business logic, but can also contain the styling, which kind of goes against separation of concerns and stuff, but it's actually pretty nice when you're working with web stuff. So here's my class. Within the class I have to render, and render is a function. So we'll just use empty parentheses and curly braces, and then we need to return from that function. For right now, I'll just do a self-closing div. So I have one class, and this is technically a React component on its own. So what I can do now, just to show you how React works, is I will use React DOM, which is what we imported up here. React DOM, use the render function. And the render function is just a function and it takes two arguments. The first is where you want it to render, the first is what you want to render, and the second is where you want it to render. So I want to render this card class. And so you represent those in JSX like this. It's got to be a capital C because it's a class. I'll use a self-closing tag for it. And then it says, well, where do you want to render it? So this is what I want to render. Where do I want to render it? Well, like I talked about before, I want to render it to this div right here in this HTML file. So I'll just get that element by its ID, which is root. So okay, we'll do just a regular old document dot get element by ID and just say root. And if I go stick something in this div now, like hi, close the div tag, you should see hi. Why do I not see it? Oh, I guess it added transpile. Normally it just does it in real time, but I guess I was switching between files and the ID got confused. When it transpiles, it just takes this kind of syntax, which you're not really allowed to use. It's not HTML, it's called JSX, and turns it into, and it turns this React stuff too, like this React DOM render, it turns it all into regular JavaScript. Browsers only understand HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. Maybe some other stuff on top of that. You can pretty much guarantee that those three things the browser is going to understand. They don't understand JSX, or what this is doing is transpiling any React or JSX into plain old JavaScript. So yeah, I'm going to leave this tag empty for now. I'll make another class, and this is pretty much the template for these classes, so I'll just copy it 2 more times, and I'll say class, I'll call this one color, and this will be the color portion of the swatch card, and then this one will be the, say, display portion of it, just the text output of it. So I have 3 classes, or 3 React components, technically, and I'm showing only this top one, and as you can see, it still works. But these other classes aren't being used. I kind of like sticking the styling right in the component. And people argue about this, say, well, it still needs to be in a CSS file or whatever. But for now, since I'm playing around with React, I'm going to stick the styling for this card inside this component. The styling has to be within the render function. If it's not, it doesn't work. I will make a constant, so a const, and call it card style. And it's just, all it is a variable that I'm assigning this object to. I made this styling the other night. As you can see, the card is rendering this div, and within the rendering I made this card style object, which is nothing more than assigning a JSON object, I guess, or a JavaScript object to this variable card style. If I apply that to this div, which is what we're looking at right now, and this is how I would do it, I would say style equals, and then I use curly braces, and now you see this stuff. So this is what I just put in there. If I change the color or whatever, you'll see it change. So I could just say blue. It should transpile, and you'll see that. So I'm applying this style to this div. I kind of like the green better, so I'll just leave it at green. I also put styling for font already and put a little shadow on it and stuff. And so really I'm just returning the card component right now. Alright, so I guess I'll do the color part of the card next. So what I'm going to do is do the same thing as I did up there and just call this color style. Style. And I think I will say height, I'll say 150. I think I should put a height on this too, actually. Well, let me do a height of 200 on this. Put a comma in there. Right? I'll do a width of 150. So this one, I'll do a height of 175. And I will do a background color blue. You have to do JavaScript style CSS. So this is an object. So each one needs a comma except for the last one. The last one can have a comma. It shouldn't. Sometimes you get busted for that, other times you don't. Just like I did above, I'm going to apply this color style to this div. that's getting returned. And so I'll say style equals color style, the curly braces. I'm going to make this self-closing. I'm not going to return anything else inside it. So now I have this little component that should output blue that's 175 pixels tall, and it's going to be inside this div, so it should assume the width of this, I believe. So inside this div for the card, I'm going to actually take this color class and stick it in there. And this is what's cool about React, is that you can compose. It's the same with object-oriented languages, but I don't know, it just seems more like building blocks in React, just because it's more immediate, I guess. And this stuff isn't as heavyweight as doing like plain old Java, I guess. But I'm going to take that color class, capital C, and self-close it, and stick it there, and you see, oh, it didn't assume the width, because I have a, actually I have this padding up here. I might actually do just a black border around the card. Alright, so we got this little card. Right now it's rendering just this div card that's empty. I mean, I could put like hi in there or whatever. Oh, yeah, neat. I forgot I had kind of used this CSS for something else yesterday I was playing with, so I was like, I made it monospace and just did some shadows on it and stuff. But yeah, so that's what this component right now does, is it pretty much just applies all this styling to this div. And so I take this component, which does nothing but inserts a blue div, and I stick it inside that div. And so I say color, self-close it, and I get a little card. And if I change this to red or whatever, it'll change. Let me do this last part, the display. I'll just copy this CSS right now for the display. And maybe what I'll do is I'll take this font stuff out of here and put it down there. Font size, I'll stick it in here. I did like the monospace, so I'll keep that. Make sure you keep all those commas in there. So I'll do text align center and text shadow. Alright, so I have this little display, and this display thing's going to do nothing but display the color down here. So what I will do is apply this styling like we just did in the other two. Style equals, oops, I meant to rename this. We'll call this display style. I like this online IDE, it's pretty nice. I use IntelliJ every day and I love it, but this is pretty hot. It does everything I need in the moment, and it's all just online, so that's nice work for these guys. Alright, so I have this little component that should display some text. So I'm going to bust this return statement out a little bit more. You can only return one element from a React component, and so of course a lot of times people return a div and load other elements into it. So right now I'm returning the color. I'm also going to now return the display. For now I'm just going to put red in the div, and I will return this display component right below the color component. So I'll say capital display and make it self-closing. Alright, so I got to play around with the styling a little bit of that. I think if I just make the font size smaller, it might just fall into place here. Kind of doing this on the fly, so we'll go with that. Nice. So really we have three components, but there's a main component that's returning these other two. And so it's using composition, which is great. Composition rocks. Instead of rendering just this single element here, what I can do is make a variable. I don't know, I just call it element. Element, it should probably be plural like elements, but I don't know, I just call it element myself. And we'll make a little object, and we'll say this object contains the card class, or the card component. Actually, you know what? It doesn't need this. I believe I can just do this. Right now I'm going to replace this with element, and it still works. It should, at least. Oh, you know where that hi came from? I believe it's still in here. It must be in my component up here somewhere, in one of my divs. I'll find it. Oh, I don't know where it's coming from. I guess it could be cache or something. Let me just see. Oh, I have to save this file, that's why. Alright, so now, yeah, it was coming from that HTML file, it never refreshed. Once you build a component, you can reuse it, which is, of course, is cool. And so I could say, hey, I want another card. Oops, you can only render one thing at a time, so I have to say, or stick it in a div, and close the div. And you see, you got two of them. They're kind of crowded, so I'll go up to the card component itself. This makes sense having the styling right in here for me, and that's probably part of reasoning behind it. I know where the component is. I don't have to search for it. I'll make the margin be like, 15 pixels. And now when I make these components, this is the beauty of React, is that once you build something, you get it with all the shadows and everything else that I went into each part of it and the styling of the text. You just pile them together or compose them together within another component. So I'll go back to one card here for now. What I want to do is use properties to set the color in the name. So where it says color here, where it says background color, and I have it hard coded to red, how about I say, let's make the background color be this dot props, the properties within this class, and I'll give it a name. So I'll just call it myself, I'll just call it BG color. This is undefined, there's no definition, so it's just returning 0 or whatever. And so it's not showing. This card's render function is calling the color component. I have to define what the background color is going to be. I think it's better practice to capitalize this. When I call the card function down here, card function runs and it runs this return which calls the color function. So I have to set the background color here. So I'll say BG color equals red, and it passes the properties to the color component. This red is hard coded, so say I go change this to blue, you'll notice this doesn't match. So I'm going to make that change too. And so what I'll do in the display, I'll return this dot props dot BG color. When the card component runs, it also calls the display, which will get past the BG color to display in its div if I define it. So I'll say BG color equals blue. And I'm realizing I am doing this wrong because I would have to change it in two spots. I don't want to be changing it there. I need to change it on the card component itself. So what I want to be able to do is say BG color when I'm rendering these card components, and I want it to insert that. All I think I have to do is say, make this be this props BG color. Yeah, that's all I had to do. And that was actually a good little detour. So now, if I type red or whatever, it changes the card. And you can type hex numbers in here as well. But you get a little color card. And so here's the beauty. We built this little thing here that displays these color cards. And if I want a new one, all I gotta do is paste it. And yeah, it's the same color right now, but this time I want this color to show up. Oh, darn near the same color. How about this? They're all in the same, I could just do red. Look at these like nice looking components I built with just a little bit of CSS. I think it's pretty cool. And I can imagine it's beautiful just being able to go in here and say, oh yeah, I need another one, and just go like, yeah, need one for this color. It just renders. And gosh, I'm like choosing colors that are all kind of the same. Alright, there's a different one. So React is pretty cool, and so this was an example of using components, composition, and props. And React is turning out to be pretty cool. Alright, well, take care and thanks for listening.